This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to author and business systems expert David Jenyns. If there's a quote I've heard most often from the guests we've had on the podcast, it's probably something to the effect is, if you want to improve a workflow, the first step is to document the process. This resonates with me because for quite a while now at our company, we've been trying to document as many processes as we can. Since documenting processes has become a priority for me, I've read every article and book I could get my hands on about it. In fact, I've even read multiple books about the history of McDonald's because we know they famously document everything. They were interesting reads, but I figured out what might work at McDonald's may not work at a legal services company. Why is that? Well, for example, one interesting tidbit I learned about McDonald's is that in the early days, they spent months researching and perfecting their French fry process by doing all kinds of stuff to the potatoes before they even hit the fryer, like removing moisture, moderating temperature, doing chemical analysis. You name it, they tried it. But the point being, documenting and analyzing every minute detail might work for large fast food joints, but when the goal is to be efficient and nimble, maybe too much process documentation can be overkill. I've also figured out in this process that some systems and workflow will be followed every time, but that for some tasks they won't be. So that's where today's guest comes in. David Jenyns is an author and a business systems expert. In fact, he's even written the book on it called Systemology. Even though the book's been out for a while now, I only recently ran across it, but it immediately resonated with me because it offers a common sense way of actually capturing business processes, documenting them, and creating workflows that people will actually follow. In fact, one of the myths that David's book debunks is that you have to have McDonald's level processes for them to work. David's developed a framework he calls Systemology, hence the name of the book. As we will hear, he believes that the root of many business problems is really a systems problem, and that by identifying and documenting what works and making it repeatable, businesses can transform themselves. But you might be asking, how does this apply to the nuanced world of law, where every case, every client, every contract seems to be unique? Is it even possible to systemize legal work without stifling the very expertise and judgment that makes a good lawyer good? As David's going to tell us, the answer is yes. He explains by systemizing the rote parts of legal work, that actually unlocks not only scalability, but also creativity for the parts of legal matter that actually require bespoke skill. David didn't start out as a systems expert, even though his dad was. He started in the fast-paced world of search engine optimization, building a successful business there. But after the arrival of his first child, he figured out he wanted to be a present dad. So he figured out he needed to build a business that wasn't dependent on him and a business that could thrive without him constantly being at the center of it.
When I found out we were pregnant, that was the big shake up to go, hey, I've got to change the way that I'm doing business, because I was very much the center cog in that SEO business and everything from leads, sales, operations. I was a part of it. And then I thought, well, I don't want to be that dad who's always too busy, and I need to relook at how I was doing things. So I spent a good amount of time, it was about 12 months, really heavily focusing in on the systems side of things to remove myself some of the key tasks and get a team member to step in and really help take over that. And then in that process, when we had my first child, Nate, I ended up taking some time off. I took the year off and I kind of reflected on what I was doing, and I realized I fell out of love with the business. I used to really get jazzed and juiced by working with business owners to help them market online, but I just lost that passion, and I just spent that time in when I had some time out going, well, what do I want to do? What am I really passionate about? And I had a few things on the go. I had a software as a service company called System Hub, and I'd sort of already got a little bit of an inkling of systems and processes. And I thought, that's really what I want to follow. I felt like there's a big hole in the market, and I didn't feel like people were solving the systems problem like I felt like they should be solved. And after I just went everything through the digital agency and getting out of those day-to-day operations, that's when I was like, you know what? I think I can solve this problem better than anyone else.
Was this a result of you putting in systems in your digital agency?
Yeah, I've always had a little bit of a systems flavor through all of the different businesses I've been involved in. My dad was a systems engineer,
Ah, it's in your blood.
so
It's
I
hereditary.
kind of had some early programming, but for whatever reason, when I got to the digital agency, I started to think this business was different because it moved so quickly because Google's always updating its algorithm and we're a creative digital agency and my team won't follow process. And I had all of these reasons why it wouldn't work. And I believe that's what trapped me in that business for too long. And then I came back to it because I we were getting some checklists into place, and I had a initially it was a Dropbox folder, and it had so many different Word documents and text files, and it was just one big jumbled mess. And then I started to scratch my own itch with this software program that we developed to organize and store our processes. So that really was where the kernel of the idea came from. I was getting ourselves organized, and then I realized in the digital agency how disorganized 99% of all of the businesses that we worked with were. And we were more organized than them. And then I started to go, oh, okay, well, there's something here, and I've developed this software. And then I started sharing that with a few people. And then I realized, hang on, just having the software is not enough. And that's really when I spotted the big gap. I found it's not the software or the tool or the app that makes you systemized, it's the approach, and it's about building a culture and hiring the right staff and the right programming. And that's when I was like, oh, that's the bit that's not focused on well enough, yet it's arguably the most important part in business.
You say that a lot. I've heard you say it on your podcast a lot. Culture of systems. That's what at the crux of it, right? You've got to capture that. What year is it that you launch System Hubs and then move over to working on the systems and systemology?
We launched System Hub, it was about 2017 is when I kind of had it starting, and then I kind of had it running off to the side for a couple of years. And when I took that time out, it really was just a side project that I developed to scratch our own itch. So it was just sort of bubbling there. And then I had a series of fortuitous events that kind of led Michael Gerber, the founder of the E-Myth, a bit of a legend in the small business space, the godfather of business systems. And I did some work with him. And I think that was a big part of also what breathed the passion and the life into this particular dream, because I realized, yes, at the core of this, I'm here to help business owners step out of the day-to-day operations. It's a challenge I struggled with. And yeah, that it was around that time. And what are we now? 2025. So probably about 6 or 7 years into working exclusively on solving this problem, which is how do we build a systems culture and remove the business owner from the day-to-day operations?
When did you start thinking about writing the book? Systemology is the book. You got a new one coming. We'll talk about that in a second.
The book's now 5 years old, so we're looking at that was around 2020, I believe, and kind of happened a little bit after. Like I started to the way I write books, because this was my third book actually, and I'd done various different topics, but the way I write books is I first test the material in the field with, through either consulting or doing little workshops, or I find books, a big part of what makes a great book great is understanding all of the different topics and then starting to organize them, figure out which bits work, which bits don't, deleting bits, testing it in the real world, getting feedback, and then you're effectively distilling all of that knowledge into a book. So, yeah, it took me a bit of time to kind of get those ideas together.
Systemology book, the book I keep talking about, that's the one that you kind of explain how to create this culture of systems. There's 7 steps that we'll talk about here in a second. You got a book coming out here later this year, right?
That's right. So, I first wrote Systemology, the book you were talking about for the business owner. And like, I believed that the case has already been made why systems. I've never had a discussion with a business owner where we haven't agreed that systems and processes aren't important. They just deliver better outcomes for everybody. So whether that's for clients, staff, business owner, partners, they work better. So with that understanding, and I felt like people like Michael Gerber and some of the greats, Vern Harnish, like they had made the case for why systems. Systemology was written for the business owner to actually go, well, how do we do it? What are the steps? Where do we start first? What systems do we document? How do we get the team on board? And then my next book, which I've sort of been thinking about now for the last 3 or 4 years now, very shortly after, I started to, again, really analyze what are the difference between those systems that really, or those businesses that really make this work and those that don't. And oftentimes they have this junior apprentice that I call the systems champion. And it's the team member that really helps to support the business owner in building this systems culture. So my next book is written for that person. And it's almost like a playbook for them on how do we get the team on board? What do we do when people don't follow process? What little workshops should we be running? Where does AI fit into this mix and how can it help the systems champion get more done with less? So that's a big part of the next book that at the moment it's actually with the editor and I've just started working on the cover with a designer. So I'm looking at probably about a mid-year to release that one.
Yeah, good.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
So let's back up before we get to the systems champion. Let's talk about not the junior partner, the partner, or whoever is in charge of the organization. You meet him at a barbecue, like Barbie. That's what you call Barbie, right?
Yeah.
Barbie. And he says to you, like my company's doing fine. We're fairly efficient. I'm making good money. Like, why do I need to document all these systems? So what do you tell him? What's your short speech there to convince him that even if it's going well, it could be going better?
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So we know that the business owner needs to want this and they need to lead it. Even though they might not be doing the documentation, they need to, in front of the team, say, we are doing this, we are investing time, money, and effort into this. This is worthwhile. So, with that in mind, I need the business owner to want this. So I actually start off by talking and asking questions about what's not working in their business. Because all problems, really, at the root level, are systems problems. So when we look at what are the problems in business, you can always trace it back to process. So that's generally where I would start with the business owner around, well, what's not working? Are you heavily involved in different parts of the business? Are you looking to grow the business and scale it and you've reached certain bottlenecks with certain team members? Are you looking to sell the business one day? Like there's quite a few reasons why systemization is a good idea, because when you think about it, I mean, at the core, really all I'm talking about is identifying what works and making it repeatable. And in the infinite number of things that we could systemize in a business, we apply the 80/20 rule. We just identify what are the most critical things in the business, in each of the different departments, in each of the different roles, and who currently does those things well. Let's capture that and then just say, hey, that's now the baseline. That's the starting point. So kind of when I go through that exploration with the business owner and we uncover why or what is not working in their business, I can make the case that systems will help to solve that problem. And systems always improve business. Like, I have never been in a situation where it hasn't turned out to be a good idea, even in creative businesses, even in, very organized, detailed businesses. Like, it works at every spectrum.
Yeah, you've just alluded to it. Organized, detailed business. Presumably, or obviously, most people listening to this podcast are in legal. And I was excited after I started reading the book and I did some web research. You've actually had a couple people on your podcast that are in legal. I think the one that I listened to most recently, I think they were called the Crow Estate Planning Firm. I think they're in Tennessee in
Yes.
America. But it showed to me that people in legal, this is on people's radar. That's really cool. What do you tell the lawyer who comes to you and says, I kind of get it, but what I do is really bespoke and it's, I go to court and make arguments or grow estate planning. I draft wills, which obviously is more procedural than that. But what do you tell that person who says, what I do is not conducive to your ideas and putting systems in place?
It's a common misconception around systems that you can't systemize creative businesses. When I had my breakthrough moment was with that digital agency. I had a part of that company that had a video production business in it. And I remember one day I had to go on a shoot with my videographer, and in the car ride there, where he's asking questions and we're talking about, oh, did we bring the spare battery? Have I got the second lens? Did we email the client to let them know not to wear checkered shirts because it doesn't look very good on screen? Oh, did we make sure that we printed out a second copy of the script? All this stuff that just should have been handled. And what I realized at the end of that shoot, I said to him, look, next time we're going to create a shoot or a pre-shoot checklist. The night before, you're going to follow the checklist, charge the batteries, do everything that you need to do, pack it all ready to go so you don't have to think about it. And then you go on a shoot. About 6 months later, after we put the checklist in place, I go on another shoot with him. And the experience was so different with him, where I was driving on the shoot with him and we were talking about things like the shots that he wanted to get and the emotion that he wanted to get across and all the creative stuff. And what I realized in that moment was there are certain things in business that just need to happen, and they need to happen in a certain way. You systemize that, you systemize everything around the creativity. And what ends up happening is by making sure that that stuff is handled, you create space for the creativity to happen now, because you don't have to fill your brain with all of these needless details because you just know it's handled. And then that creates the space for the creativity. So I'd make the case for the lawyer that there's probably a whole bunch of things that just need to happen to prep for cases and prep to clients, and it needs to be done in a certain way and communicated. And you just want that done so that you can then have the thinking space to focus on the argument, which may be unique in a lot of different situations based on the evidence in the situation. So the more you look into it, it's like a knee-jerk reaction of just what people pre-assume systems are. But once you actually start to apply this and you challenge a lot of these misconceptions, you realize that, hey, it's not as you thought.
Let's get to it. Let's talk about 7 steps in systemology. You got define, assign, extract, organize, integrate, scale, and optimize. So define. That's the step where you identify the processes that you should take the time and document, right?
It's just where you get started. Once someone goes, I want to do this, the first question they ask is, where do I start? What do I document? This is a thinking tool. In the define stage, I give something I call a critical client flow. And it's just a way to go, what is the core product or service? What are the key steps that we go through from capturing a prospects' attention through to selling them, onboarding them, and delivering the core products and services at a very high level? Because we know if we identify those and we can systemize those, then we can start to remove key people like the business owner who might be involved in a lot of the different steps. And it's a way to apply the 80/20 to your business. We're looking for the 20% of the systems that deliver the bulk of the result. So it's a great starting point to go, well, here are 10 to 15 systems that are essential to the delivery of my core product or service. Okay, well, let's start there.
How do you determine the 20? Obviously, if one's contributing to revenue more than others, I mean, that's obvious, but what about other stuff that may not be as obvious as just putting more money in the bank?
Most problems in business can be solved with money. So, and the purpose of the business is to keep the promise that you make to your clients. You're looking to solve a problem for them and you want to keep to that, and that's what you get rewarded for. So, if we understand, well, that is business, that's a great place to start. And using the critical client flow, we say, what is the primary product or service? What is the dream client that we're selling that primary product or service to? Let's just capture the systems related to the delivery of that product or service. What are the ways we're currently capturing people's attention? How are we currently handling that incoming inquiry? How are we currently selling them? How are we currently collecting money or onboarding them? And, that first meeting we have with them, and then the doing of the work, and then getting them to come back. Now, you're right. That doesn't cover recruitment and onboarding and some finance systems and other management systems and HR systems. And a lot of that comes later. It really is, we start, and that's actually in step number 6, where we cover some of those other systems. But in step number 1, what a lot of business owners haven't had the experience of is their business making money without them. Most business owners at some level is usually involved. So I aim to first give the business owner the experience that their business can make money without them. That gives them oftentimes a paradigm shift. So that's why we start there. And then a bit later on, we come to the other departments.
I want to talk about a myth while we're talking this step define, we're figuring out what to document. You're adamant, because I've seen you say this multiple times. You don't have to be McDonald's. You don't have to document everything and have 90-page checklists of how to mop the floor. Why is that?
I remember hearing an interview with Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix. He was talking about dummy proofing their business like McDonald's, wanted to systemize everything, and they headed down that path. And after huge investment, systemizing everything down to painstaking detail, he said, "Oh, we finally dummy proofed our business, but only dummies wanted to work here." And there is a path that you can go too far, and people will look to McDonald's and think, oh, well, that's the poster child of systemization. We've got to copy what they're doing. And they don't think about the fact that McDonald's runs a hamburger business and they're recruiting 15-year-old kids to flip hamburgers. So they have to do documentation to a certain level for certain roles because these kids haven't had any experience and they have to go down to painstaking detail. But a lot of business owners, and if you're listening to this, I mean, you're probably running a successful law firm and you're recruiting intelligent people who come pre-baked with certain skills. And we don't want to tell them how to take out the trash or really basic stuff. So it's about thinking about what is important and what things need to be done to a particular standard for consistency to make sure that the business delivers to a certain level. And that's the level we go to. Some things might require more documentation. Some things might just need a checklist. And you really need to write the levels or write the systems to what the role requires.
And to your point there, I mean, you hired a bunch of good lawyers and you want them to use their creativity and their education. So you got to give them some room, right? You can't say every time we see this argument, you've got to, push back with this, or every time you see this situation we're drafting a will, you got to do this. You need to allow them creativity, right?
Yeah. And oftentimes when we talk about systems, systems are a great starting point where we capture the most probable, what is most likely to happen. And we capture that. It's the teaching point. It's where we would teach junior team members or new team members that come on board with the team. And then they get a feel for the way that the business works and they get into it. And when there's variations that happen outside of that system, generally that will go to more skilled senior team members who then understand how to handle the variations. So systems are just the vanilla version and where to get started.
Another myth you say is that everything's in the owner's head or the business owner's hand or the CEO's head, and they've got to be the one to document these systems. But that goes into step number 2. You say, no, you need to assign somebody else to do it, a systems champion. Why is that? You would think that, especially if the person founded the company, they know that all these processes in and out. Why are they not the best?
So there's a couple pieces here. Firstly, the business owner, like many of your great team members, are extremely busy. And the business owner in particular has a vision for the way that they would like things to be. So they might try and craft the system or the process the way that they want it to be, not the way that it is. And that can create a stumbling block because now they're really, really busy and they need to design these processes, and there's going to require some thinking. So everything stalls and gets to a grinding halt if it's sitting waiting for that person to do it. So having what we call the systems champion, someone on the team who can help with the documentation, who can meet with knowledgeable team members and just go, what are you currently doing? And let's make that repeatable. Let's just capture that. It doesn't have to be world class. It doesn't have to be perfect. Extraordinary wins can be gained by just capturing what you're currently doing and making that repeatable. That becomes the new baseline. So, this stage 2 in systemology that you're talking about is just saying, of the 10 or 15 systems that we identified in step number 1, who knows how to do those tasks to a good standard? Let's identify that person. Preferably, we skip the business owner where we can. We work with the systems champion to just capture and meet with those team members to document what they're currently doing. And that's really what flows into step number 3.
Which is extract. The systems champions extracting that information, that system from whomever is in charge of that.
Yeah. And we have what we call a system for creating systems, which is just, how do we meet with that knowledgeable person? How do we record what they're doing? How do we document? This stage actually is the one that's probably changed most significantly since me writing the Systemology book. With the advent of AI, it's now infinitely quicker for us to document process. We can meet with those team members, record what they're doing, get it transcribed, feed it into ChatGPT, ask it to draft a process, and we can cut the time down about to 1/10 of what it used to take. We can now create really great processes. So it's about training up that systems champion on how to use those tools, and then how to, after we extract it, again, it flows into that next step, which is then we need to start to organize that knowledge and have that central location for where all of this is stored.
What do you recommend for recording? I assume you Loom, maybe even just recording a meeting on Google Meet or Zoom or whatever?
Depending on the systems champion, whatever they're already comfortable with, generally the tools that you're already using. So Loom or Zoom or Google Meet, or it could be your iPhone if it's in the real world. Like, I think in the legal world, probably a lot of the work that you do, you can record it off your desktop, but that's not always the case. And so it's just about finding the tools that the systems champion and those knowledgeable team members would be comfortable with and using those.
Okay, see, you've got the extraction piece done. You've got these systems documented, organized. You need to store them in a central location so people know where to look for them, or if you're hiring new people, they know to look. What's involved there? What do you recommend? What tools?
Generally, we start off by just saying simple is best. And again, if you've got some tools and they're already working, use those. If you don't have any tools and you're not sure where to store them, that software as a service that I mentioned, I launched, called systemhub.com. That's a tool that I designed to house SOPs, or standard operating procedures. These systems have them in a central location. There's really two pieces that are required to make organized work. Firstly, you need a place to store your systems and processes. And the second piece is, and some law firms will already have this in place. You mentioned Asana earlier, and different practices might have different project management tools, but having some form of project management tool is great to pair with the where you're storing your systems and your processes. The key is, when you assign a task to someone, you want to link to the system or the process that explains how that task is done. So that way, There's no room for confusion. We know who is doing what by when, and it is clearly outlined how that is to be done and to what standard. Getting those two pieces together actually sort of unlocks this accountable, transparent business that you're looking to build.
Okay, so then integrate. You've got to organize, you got to extract it. Now it's, if I understand integrate, it's getting the people to actually follow the systems that you have in place. How do you do that?
So this is initially when I thought about my next book, and I've written it on Systems Champion, I was almost thinking I was going to write the book on this topic, integrate, because it's probably the least understood area.
I would argue most difficult, right? To get people to
Yes,
actually follow the system.
yes. It's one thing to have it written. It's another thing to get team members to follow it. Couldn't have said it better myself. So this is about getting the team on board, and there's a few things that can happen here. Firstly, you've got existing team members, and then you think about new team members. Existing team members is where most of the challenge is that you're going to have. So we need to think about, how do we have the team member understand that this is a benefit to them? Like oftentimes, and this analogy is going to be perfect for you, I talk about, imagine you're in the court of law and you needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that your business is a systems driven business. What evidence could you produce? And the systems champion's job is to plant as much evidence around the organization as possible. So that's running little workshops, mentioning it on team meetings, having an award when someone follows a process, and celebrating system wins and sharing these processes and keeping them front and center. A big part of this job of the systems champion is to build this culture up and just keep doing it until we get over the hump, because there's always the resistance at the start, but you persist with this long enough and you get to the point where people just go, this is just how we do things here. That's the point everything starts to change. So that's for existing team members, and it's the hardest, and that's where most people give up. They start for 3 months, they get a bit of resistance, the team doesn't follow the process, and they go, oh, this doesn't work for me. But you've got to persist past that. And then the second piece is around building in systems thinking into your recruitment and your onboarding process, because they did this test. It was back in the 1960s. They had a bunch of actors standing in this elevator, and all the actors were facing the wrong way. And then someone walked into the elevator, and they couldn't help themselves. They were the person the experiment was being done on. They turned and faced the same way as all of the other actors, just because that's what everybody in the elevator was doing. And they just assumed, they went with the flow. That's what we're looking to recreate in your business, where effectively the systems and the processes help to orient and point everybody in the direction that you want them to be. So when they step into that elevator, it's just a natural thing for them to turn into the right direction. And that's actually why it's much easier as you start to recruit and you onboard new team members.
So tell me if I'm overthinking this one. So for some of the processes, I think I mentioned earlier, Process Street. I love that tool. It's a checklist. It's an online checklist system, but very robust. For some tasks, works great. My crew, they use it to a T. And it fills in a bunch of automations and it updates our project manager software. There's a lot of different things. And for some tasks, they use it day in and day out. But we've tried to set this up for other tasks, and it just doesn't work for those. So am I overthinking this? I mean, is it just sometimes a checklist is not going to work for some tasks and sometimes it does? Or what's your response to that?
I was working with a karate gym, and they were having trouble getting their instructors at the end of the class to follow a certain process. Certain team members were following other processes in other departments, and when the person was sitting in front of the screen, but for whatever reason, they couldn't get the karate instructors to follow the process for when at the end of a class, for cleaning up, turning off the lights and finishing up for the day. So what they ended up doing was creating a checklist that they created a QR code for, so it could be scanned on the phone and it would jump straight to the checklist. And They then stuck that QR code right next to the lights and near the door, which is the last thing that they do when someone would leave. And they made it so that the way that the team member would log the time on the timesheet to get paid, they had to go through this step. So they would scan the QR code, follow the checklist, hit next, and then on the next page they would get to, and now you populate your timesheet and then you get paid. And what that made me realize, and I've worked with a few businesses like that, where sometimes it's about thinking about what the tasks are and how to hopefully reduce friction. Oftentimes, it's the friction that in certain areas makes other people not follow it. So it might be too hard. Some tasks, it's really easy and it's right under their nose. But other tasks, maybe they're out in the field and they don't have the iPad handy and they can't get to the checklist. And oh, now it's all too hard. And I know how to do this thing. I'm just going to do it anyway. So you might need to look at, like, the whole purpose of a system is to make it easier for the team member. And then, particularly in the early days, when someone, if they're making a mistake, you can say, look, it's my expectation that we follow the process. I don't care if you've got the process open or not, if you're doing the task as we've outlined it. But if you're not doing it as it's outlined and that's creating problems for you and for other team members, then I expect you to have the checklist open until at which point you've trained it until you know how to do it.
Last two steps, scale and optimize. Seems to me that those are kind of go hand in hand. What are we doing there?
So scale is just about identifying the systems, as we talked about from the other departments. Like right at the start, step number one, we talked about capturing the 10 or 15 systems that you start with, but it didn't address the entire organization. Scale is just about thinking, what are the other systems required in each of the different departments? And I call this reaching minimum viable systems, the point at which minimum number of systems touches every department and every role. And that's really the key milestone that the systems champion must get to. So that's that scale stage.
Is any process too small to systemize?
Kind of like we go back to, that idea of Reed Hastings and Netflix. That the main thing to think about is every system needs to be useful. We only create a system if it improves the business. And it's a game of prioritization. In business, there's any infinite number of things you could be systemizing, and we need to choose the critical few that will have the biggest impact. So we just need to ask the question around, is this really important to the business? Does it have to be done a certain way to get a particular result? And is that result contributing to the success of each of the different departments? If it does, then it's worth systemizing. But again, it's prioritization. So you need to think, are there other systems that would be more important for us to focus on first?
And I think I've heard you say this before. Don't systemize for systemization's sake, right?
Yeah, and that idea, like, and I see it a lot with different methodologies like ISO, when people go for ISO certification, and oftentimes they're just systemizing to tick a box so that they can say, oh, I've got a process for that. I'm ISO certified, which has nothing to do with, does the team actually use it? Do we have a systems culture? Is it adding value to the business? Which is where you should come from, in my opinion, to build a great systems culture.
I heard you mention something about Six Sigma. You draw a distinction there.
What makes Systemology unique, and many of what the different methodologies that have come before it, is it seeks to solve a different problem for a different purpose or a different business owner. A lot of things like Six Sigma, they're process improvement methodologies. So they pre-assume you have a process to improve. Whereas what I'm talking about with Systemology is actually process capture. A lot of business owners, and I'm talking about ones that are earlier in their journey, haven't yet identified their process, so they can't improve the process if they don't even know what it is. So we capture what is working and what is best practice, and we start there. Whereas Six Sigma, a lot of that was developed for manufacturing and larger organizations where they have clear process and it's about looking to improve. So that's really probably the big distinction. Systemology is about process capture. It's step one. It actually happens before these other methodologies. And Systemology works with the other methodologies. They just usually come later.
Right. Especially in fields like legal, right? Because to your point, Six Sigma comes from manufacturing, obviously. There's a process in place by default because there's an assembly line, right? So they've already got that, for lack of a better way of describing it, documented. So if you're coming at legal and you want to do that, you've got to first capture your manufacturing process. How are you going to write that brief? How are you going to draft that will? How are you going to negotiate that contract, right?
Yes. And oftentimes, like we said, it's just about identifying who currently does that task really well and then go, what are the steps they're going through? And oftentimes, they might not even be aware of it. Like the process often exists in the person's head. That's really what we're doing. We're trying to extract that methodology or that habit. And I talk about systems being documented habits. And habits people just do automatically. And what we're looking at doing is making what is not visible visible. We want to make sure that it's visible so that other people can see it, follow that, repeat it a number of times till it becomes their habit.
David, before I let you go, where do people start? What's the first step? Give them the nugget right now. What do they need to do right now to start putting these systems in place?
First thing, I'm just hoping listening to this, we've lit that fire inside of you to say that systems and processes are possible for you to build the business of your dreams. If you want to do this and build a profitable business that works without you and be a true business owner, at some point you will have to get systems in place. I mean, the first step, I suppose maybe a little bit selfishly, I just say get a copy of the Systemology book. Go to Amazon. If you're listening to this, maybe you like audio and there's an Audible version. The book is useful, complete, goes through the 7 stages and is the best place to get started. And then if you need more help after that, then yeah, you can just head over to the website and I've got a bunch of different resources to really support you and your systems champion.
Yeah, tell us where the website is. Tell us where to find the website, the podcast. Tell people where to go.
Yeah, so if you just go to systemology.com and from there, yes, there's a link through to the podcast where we have that interview you mentioned with Crow Estate. It's actually with their systems champion, Kelly Salisbury. Great interview and will help give you an understanding from a systems champion perspective what this looks like rolling it out in a law firm. And there's also some links to a podcast and some extra resources to download to kind of really help you on that journey. And then we've got some different programs. Some people need a little bit of extra support. So we have some do it yourself and some live programs also.
David, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.